The Means to an End by its_Kingston on AO3. Episode 9, Chapter 5. I wonder, though, how are we to get to it? Besides climbing the tree, I see no way. Well, then, we climb it, Togo replied. I can, if you rather. Nonsense, Uraraka said, smiling at her. I wish to at least attempt to grab it myself. It would taste better that way, would it not? I'll make sure you do not harm yourself then, though I feel as though our position should be reversed. You hardly seem the type to put yourself in danger, Toga said. Her voice rose and fell with a touch of amusement. Danger? Uraraka asked, raising an eyebrow. What do you find so dangerous about a simple tree? Even I was able to climb the ones in the castle garden after sneaking away from the guards, she said. Her voice was fond, like she was reliving the moment. Part of her was, though the present experience. It's been a number of years, though, and this one is lacking low branches. A hum was the last sound Uraraka heard from Toga before the rogue donned that smile of hers, the one she wore when she almost kissed Uraraka, the one she wore that made Uraraka's heart rattle around her chest like a giddiness forgotten from her childhood, like she was let on a secret only Toga and she knew. Did you have a secret hideaway nested in the branches of the trees? Toga asked. Her eyes were wide, expertly. Uraraka thought her to be nothing more than a child at heart, and wondered if such a thing was a product of growing up too quickly. No, Uraraka said, shaking her head slightly. That sounds intriguing, though. Did you? With a sigh, Toga replied. Never. The Legion moves too much for me to have one now, either. Though the way we flee across the land makes it feel like children's games sometimes. Much higher stakes, though. Uraraka eyed the apple nearest the ground. Suppose I could borrow your dagger? Ah, now that seems dangerous. Toga laughed. She pulled it from her sheath, spinning it around and offered it to Uraraka in a single fluid motion. Do not go sticking up any wagons, though, not without training. Hush now, Uraraka replied. The blade fell, awkward, in her hands, clumsy. I believe I can jump and cut the stem of this one. She pointed towards the lower-hanging apple. What says you? Could work, though you'll drop it before you get off the ground if you don't grip it properly. Unlike me, the dagger won't bite. Toga said, Hold it tighter. She smiled at Uraraka, something knowing, daring. I'll hold you tighter, even if you bite me, Uraraka said, eyeing the apple she wanted. She heard the noise Toga made in reply, something surprised and oh so endearing, tightening her hold and jumping as high as she could, dagger swinging aimlessly. It seemed Toga had recovered, for it was her stifled laughs that made it clear Uraraka had missed her target. Uraraka's smile faded as she turned to Toga, her eyes narrowed with something at a playful challenge. Oh, do you want to try? Perhaps I will, the rogue said. She didn't miss the way Uraraka smiled at her as she held her hand back to the blade. Toga replied forward, an easy smile on her lips as she lined up a shot. There was a beat of silence, of stillness. Then her arm extended, and the dagger flew. It buried itself in the tree, just above where the top of the apple was. The fruit fell, landing in Uraraka's waiting hands. Impressive. Uraraka laughed. And thank you, she added, taking a bite from the apple. The stem was severed from the branches, but the fruit itself stayed completely intact. It was everything she expected, and then more. The apple was juicy, something she experienced through the spiced water and honey it floated in with Bakugou brought jars of that stuff. But different here. Crisp and new. Warm with sunlight. Toga smiled, took a bow. Of course, princess. Happy to help, she said. Though such a feat deserves a reward. Blade temporarily forgotten in the side of the tree, Toga held out her hands, quickly taking another bite. Uraraka tossed the apple over to Toga. It's fantastic, Uraraka said. Toga nodded in agreement as she took a bite of her own. She looked at Uraraka as she did, their eyes meeting. Softly, she heard words echoed in her mind. Unlike me, The dagger won't bite. I don't suppose you'll be robbing me of my apple and leaving your dagger behind now, will you? Toga laughed and tossed the apple back to Uraraka before making her way up the tree. Uraraka didn't think too hard about the bite marks, being close enough to the apple that the sides were touching. Nor did she admire Toga's as she jumped and grabbed onto a branch, hardly able to reach it. She climbed through the trees like she lived there her entire life, stopping only to pull her knife from the bark and jumping down. It reminded Uraraka of the scene from her tower, of Toga moving so gracefully to the side. You're incredible at that, Uraraka said. Her voice was tinted with awe. Perhaps it had been since she'd met Toga. Are we moving on to the next orchid? She asked. The rogue seemed to cut her tone on the compliment, for she only stared for a moment, face pinker than experted would have it. It was as though she'd missed Uraraka's warnings through these attacks were anything but stealthy. No, we'll be off, she said. I told the Legion we'll be arriving at the location soon. We're to be through the forest on the outskirts of UA as we retreat home, she said. Home? Uraraka asked. Wait, does that mean... Toga waved that hand, non-commercially. No, the prince lives. We're gathering forces and seeing how they handle this. If the prince takes control of the land, we may be in better company, so long as Yagi doesn't try to puppet him. We do good to level well enough alone. Perhaps in the future he'll be valued even, she mused. Nothing to worry over. If anything, this means we'll have more time to venture out. Uraraka nodded, content with the thought. Sparing the man's life was the best outcome, and she sincerely hoped it would turn out well. The idea of running around the world, Toga's hands in hers, was a much better plan in Uraraka's sincerest opinion. Part of her wondered how differently this would all be now, had she never met the rogue, or had the prince swooped in to save her. Hell, if Bakugou had helped her down and carried her back to his kingdom, where'd she'd be now? The logical part of her mind, hopefully, told her she'd still be there, in the kingdom, though that wasn't the answer she was looking for. The trees that marked the forest's edge were far the tallest. They hovered the sunlight, catching it with the darkest pine needles that stuck out like fingers from the outstretched branches. Uraraka looked up at them as their pair approached, yet could hardly spot their tops. From the ground they seemed to pierce the clouds, and perhaps stretch up past the heavens. We'll be meeting up with them for travel here, Toga said. She waved a hand, gesturing grandly to the hard shadows and high foliage the trees distracted from. Uraraka tore her gaze from the clouds and lazily drifted past them and focused on the sight in front of her. Despite not being as stunning as the trees that grew far past her tower's height, the darkness of the inner forest was a new, pleasant sight in of itself. The shade was welcoming as the clouds began traversing past the woodlands, away from the pair. Uraraka nodded, unsure despite herself. Do you frequent this forest? She asked, eyes meeting Toga's. The rogue must have seen something in them, for her hand found Uraraka's. A frightened grip brought comfort with it, keeping Uraraka from peering into the trees and letting her mind conjure up the forest and habits. Yes, it's quite undesirable of those of the kingdom. They hardly follow us in, even if they're pursuing us. Her voice was light, amused, as she spoke. Uraraka was glad to hear her lack of worry, and tried to shake off her own. Dark forests were no place for a princess, but a frail princess she was not. Understood, Uraraka said, putting forth all her courage. Let us go meet them, then. I find myself wondering about your family more and more. Toga nodded, and the pair began walking forward. They're a curious bunch, but I love them dearly, she said. She pushed back a branch and stepped over a knee-high bush. Uraraka followed her. A plant grew wildly near the area they entered, taller than them both and leaning down, bearing fruit. The little purple berries grew in clusters, connecting the main part by magnostems. Ah! Toga spun around. I suggest not eating the tree grapes, she said, a grin making its way onto her face. Jin did once, to test. He was ill for a few days' time. I imagine so, Uraraka said, giving the berries a glance. They're pokeweed berries after all. The rogue hummed and replied. It'll do good to have you around earlier. Perhaps you wouldn't have had to listen to him complain. She made a motion with her hands, and the pair continued walking. They gave the pokeweed a large berth, avoiding the irritation brushing against the plants seemed to cause. Yes, there wasn't much to do in the tower but read, Uraraka said, though calling them tree grapes is quite the name. Uraraka looked over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing at Uraraka. They appear similar to grapes, but grow on trees rather than vines. Indigenous, if I do say so. Adorable, if I do say so, Uraraka replied, giggling. Toga, rather than saying anything, merely reached over and caught Uraraka's hands in hers. Uraraka looked over, noted the darkening color of her face, and smiled to herself. She wondered if the rogue preferred physical contact to anything. Wondered if she'd smile more brightly if Uraraka held her hand more often, or embraced her. She was aware of Toga's hands in hers, much more than usual. Her hand was warm, hardly sticking out of the long sleeve she wore. The buttons at the end of the sleeve, made for securing the cuffs to an appropriate length, were not in use, and bumped against Uraraka's hands. Uraraka never noticed that Toga wore rings on her right hand, or that little scar had a distant feeling to it. She had never paid mind to the tingling sensation that shot through her arm, like thunder as it shook through the ground. But she swore it was the prettiest thing she felt thus far. Uraraka was no fool. People often said it looked like a duck. Acts like a duck and quacks like a duck. It's probably a duck. And this? Them walking around, hands in hand, smiling, surely looked like something of a fairy tale. One where the prince swept the princess off her feet. The way her skin prickled with every brush, or felt as though it'd been lit on fire with every held hand, felt like something from a fairy tale. She was sure those very words had been used in a tale of romance as the princess described her prince. When Toga would smile at her, wild and toothy, Uraraka felt nothing but the urge to push a strand of her hair into its place and hug her, hold her, cling to her, and hope she'd feel hands clasp her own back. It certainly sounded like something from the pages of a novel written about two lovers. Yes, Uraraka was no fool. She was quite sure of the reasons why she found so much joy in telling Toga the nicest of things, and why she felt so much comfort from her presence alone. Yes, Uraraka was no fool, but being around Toga occasionally made her feel like one. Her mouth was suddenly very dry, and she wished she had another apple to attempt to quench it. She glanced over at Toga, only to find the rogue stealing a look at her. Neither said anything, then, as they kept walking, but Uraraka felt it in her face again, warm, yet scary. Despite the nerves in her mind crawling at her, and the confusing heat of her face, all Uraraka could bring herself to focus on was the little circles Toga began tracing across the back of her hand. Out of the corner of her eye, Uraraka caught Toga's shoulder lower, relaxed. She wondered briefly if the rogue truly was, or if she was merely trying to make Uraraka feel similarly. The comfort motions across the back of her hand hadn't stopped, but the panic in her mind lessened greatly. She supposed they were far, far worse people to be enamored with. "Are you all right?" Toga asked. She looked over at Uraraka again. "We're almost there. A few minutes' time, I imagine." "I'm all right. A bit nervous to meet them all," Uraraka said. A lie, if only by admission. "They will do you no harm, princess," Toga said. Uraraka wondered when the term became less of a title and more of an endearment. Wondered if it would sound differently falling from another's lips. When the heat returned to her face, surged back, as she looked ahead of them, attempting to busy herself looking for the others, there was less worry of the unknown. It was warm, yet welcome. We did not get a smoochy smooch smooch, but we almost got a smoochy smooch smooch, and I was almost happy, okay? So my happiness was ripped away from me. Kingston, how dare you do thy to this? What? How dare you do this to I did not be able to speak like that, okay. But how dare you? How dare you? I thought they were going to, I thought they were going to just smooch. I thought it was going to finally happen, that they were to kiss as lovers do. But instead, they did not kiss. Instead, they simply merely just looked at one another. How dare thee? I thought I was gonna get them smooching. Turns out, all I got was heartbreak. Anyways, this was a really cute chapter. I actually really enjoyed every moment of this. Uraraka thinking about, like, if it acts like a duck, walks like a duck, sounds like a duck, or quacks like a duck, then it's a duck. I love that. I love that. A lot of the times when my friends are doing stupid, like, for example, when a friend is like, I actually like them, right? I'm like, it looks like a duck, acts like a duck. What do you think it is? Right? And it's like my way of saying, like, bitches, it looks like it, sounds like it is it. Kind of situation. Like, I do that a lot. I used to do this with my other friend, right? Except they never really truly got it. Like, for example, there was this person who kept coming back into their life every couple months just to flirt, get gratification from this person, and then leave, right? Without fail, every single time. And I always told them, if it acts like a duck, quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, what do you think it is, right? If this person comes, leaves, and is behaving like someone who doesn't actually truly care about you and only cares about your gratification that you give them, what do you think this is? Exactly. Again, they never really understood it, but whatever. I love that saying so much. It's one of my favorite things to say to friends who are being ignorant. Or not ignorant, but being stupid heads. But I love this chapter so much. Uraraka finally realizing her feelings, being like, you know, could be worse. I could be enamored with someone else. I also love that word, enamored. It is one of those really fancy words. For those who don't know what enamored mean, it's basically just a really fancy word for love or bewildered, right? Hold up. Let me search up the true definition of it. But it's basically just a really fancy word to say I am in love with. To be in love with, basically. Right? Enamored is to be in love with. Yeah, to be filled with feelings of love for. Having a liking or admiration for. It's a really fancy word for I love. For the person I love. To those I love kind of situation. Enamored is such a cute, I love that word. I'm gonna right now send a message to my partner. I'm gonna send them a message. Hold up. Sorry, that's the Chinese version of TikTok. I'm sorry. TikTok's going away, and what am I gonna do? I'm gonna download the Chinese version of TikTok because fuck y'all. I'm gonna have my Chinese version of TikTok if you don't let me have the regular TikTok, okay? I think the only good thing about TikTok being taken away is the memes about TikTok being taken away. The amount of memes I've seen about people saying goodbye to their Chinese spy, people saying goodbye to the Chinese Republican who is taking away their data. A lot of people are also making fun of like, oh, you're gonna take TikTok away? Alright, time to send my DNA, my social security number, my everything to China. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not stupid. I'm not saying people are. I'm just saying I'm not gonna do that. I am gonna be on Chinese TikTok because I like my death scrolling. So yeah, but it's not the same. It's not the same, and it's not gonna be the same for me. I have a problem. Right? I get attached to things really easily. I'm really attached to TikTok, and nothing else is going to hit like TikTok. So I did this the same thing when TikTok became Musical.ly, or when Musical.ly became TikTok. I was really upset because I'm like, I don't accept this. I don't accept this. Slowly I accepted it after like 2 years. So as much as like this Chinese TikTok kind of feels like regular TikTok, it's not the same, and I keep feeling that it's not the same and it's gonna really piss me off. So am I gonna use it a lot? No. I'm gonna use it whenever I'm feeling really griefy, right? Whenever I'm feeling like desperate. But for the most part, where am I gonna turn to because I'm so upsetty spaghetti? AO3. Of course, my husband. I'm gonna be reading so much. I don't think you guys understand. AO3 Rap of 2025 is about to go fucking fire. I'm about to beat both years combined. I think. I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? I already, it's 12 days in, and I'm pretty sure I already read 500,000 words. I'm gonna be honest with you. I think I already read 500,000 words. So that's something. I am enamored Wish you my love. And then I'll send a little nice heart. No context, just that. That is all the context people should get. Anyways, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.